Welcome to our deep dive into 1854 New York City. It's like we've got a time capsule, thanks to you.
Yeah.
These New York Times excerpts, all from October 21st, are going to transport us back over 170 years. We'll be exploring everything from international news
Wow.
and local politics to even those quirky ads that give us a peek into everyday life back then.
What's really cool is that we aren't focusing on one major event, but rather piecing together a whole picture of what mattered to New Yorkers on that day. Think of it as a mosaic of daily life built from snippets of the Crimean War, election buzz, and even a runaway cow.
A runaway cow. Okay, now I have to hear that story.
Yeah.
But first, let's start with what seems to be dominating the headlines, the Crimean War.
Right.
There's an article here about a super-secret meeting in Paris between American and European diplomats. It hints at a possible peace mission, but also suggests it might just be a political smokescreen.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, you've got to remember, this was a time of shaky alliances and everyone trying to outmaneuver each other. It wouldn't be surprising if the meeting was more about political posturing than actual peacemaking. And then there's this detail about Austrian police spying on the American diplomats. Espionage was a big deal back then, especially with the Crimean War, causing so much tension across Europe.
So it wasn't just the diplomats playing games. It was a whole web of spies and secrets. I guess some things never change.
Right.
The article also mentions the release of a French Republican named Bancel from prison. Apparently, he was a pretty popular figure, even earning nicknames like the Bayard of Democracy and the People's Idol. What's his story?
Bancel was a thorn in the side of Emperor Napoleon III. He was a strong voice against the regime, so his imprisonment was seen as a way to silence opposition. His release, though, might have been a PR move by Napoleon III more than a genuine change of heart. France was in a lot of political turmoil back then, with the Second Republic having recently fallen to the Second Empire.
It sounds like Napoleon III was trying to smooth things over. It makes me wonder how the American diplomats in Paris felt about all of this. Were they rooting for Balfour or just trying to stay out of the drama?
That's a great question. The article doesn't say, but I bet they were watching the situation closely. A destabilized France could have major consequences for America.
Speaking of instability, let's move from international drama to the local kind.
Yeah.
New York City elections were coming up, and it looks like things were getting pretty heated. This letter from an independent candidate named Jacob L. Dodge really caught my eye. He was running for Commissioner of Streets and Lamps.
Okay.
But instead of appealing to his own party, the Whigs, he's urging them to vote for the Democratic nominee. Well, what's the deal with that? Was that a common tactic back then?
Not really. Usually, you'd expect candidates to fight for every vote within their own party, let alone ask for support from the opposition. It's possible Dodge thought aligning himself with the likely winner would give him more influence or maybe secure some favors down the line. Local politics in 19th century New York was all about personal connections and maneuvering for advantage, not necessarily towing the party line.
So it was less about ideology and more about who you knew.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds you politics today, doesn't it? But you know it's always a hot topic, regardless of the era? Money. And according to the Times, the financial picture in 1854 wasn't exactly rosy.
No, not at all. One article goes deep into the difficulties faced by importers. Prime paper was going for 10-12% interest, which basically means credit was super tight. Businesses were struggling to get loans.
And I'm guessing the Crimean War wasn't helping matters. It must have been disrupting global trade and making everyone nervous about investing. The article does mention that cotton was going for $8 to $10 per bale. I wonder how that compares to prices today.
Wow, that's a great question. I'm not sure offhand, but considering inflation and the changes in the cotton industry over the past 170 years, it would definitely be an interesting comparison.
All right, let's shift gears from economics to something a little more personal. This story caught my eye. A young boy attacked a well-known actress named Miss Fisher on the street. What can you tell us about this incident?
Now, while this might seem shocking to us today, we need to understand this incident through the lens of 19th century societal norms. Unfortunately, violence, especially against women, was much more commonplace back then.
So, while obviously we wouldn't condone this kind of behavior today, it's important to understand the historical context.
Exactly. The article mentions that Miss Fisher had recently triumphed in the Italian Opera of London, so she was likely a well-known figure. It makes you wonder if her fame played a role in this encounter. Was it a case of a young boy seeking attention, or perhaps something more sinister? It would be fascinating to see if there were any follow-up stories in the Times shedding more light on the situation.
Okay, before we go down that rabbit hole, let's take a look at those quirky ads we mentioned earlier. I'm fascinated by the sheer range of products and services being promoted. There are ads for shawls, plated silverware, and even something called a cure truss. What on earth was a cure truss?
Well, truss often referred to a supportive undergarment, so it was probably some sort of contraption marketed as a cure-all for various ailments. Remember, this was long before modern medicine and regulations. These ads often made bold claims that wouldn't fly today.
It's like a window into the medical beliefs of the time.
Absolutely. These ads, while strange to us now, offer valuable insight into the health concerns and anxieties of New Yorkers in 1854.
All right, so we've got international intrigue, local political drama, and a glimpse into the marketplace. What other fascinating stories await us in this 1854 time capsule?
It seems New Yorkers were also keeping a close eye on their wallets, even beyond those importer struggles. There's an article here talking about the stock market, and let's just say it wasn't exactly a bull market.
Oh, what were they saying?
Well, the Times describes it as very quiet, with very little doing. Sounds like a lack of confidence was affecting stocks as much as the money market.
It makes you wonder if everyday New Yorkers felt the same economic pinch that we sometimes do. Were they stressed about job security or their savings?
It's fascinating to think about, right? The specifics of their worries might have been different, but that underlying anxiety about finances, that's something that seems to echo through the ages.
Definitely. Well, if money talks, so does politics. We've touched on the local elections, but what about the national scene? Was anything brewing there?
You bet. Remember, this is 1854, just a few years before the Civil War. Tensions over slavery were at a boiling point. You've highlighted an article about a meeting of the American Anti-Slavery Society, and it sounds like things got pretty intense.
What were they discussing?
The article talks about impassioned speeches condemning slavery. People from all walks of life were there, demanding an end to this inhumane practice.
Wow. So it wasn't just a small group of activists. It sounds like there was real momentum building for the abolitionist movement.
Absolutely. These meetings were about more than just talk. They were strategizing, organizing, and laying the groundwork for the fight against slavery.
It's inspiring to see that even back then, people were standing up for what they believed in and trying to create a more just world. It makes you realize how much impact everyday citizens can have. Okay, let's zoom out from America for a moment. What else was happening on the world stage in 1854?
Well, aside from the Crimean War, there was another conflict brewing on the other side of the world. You've got an article here about the Taiping Rebellion in China. This rebellion lasted for over a decade and completely reshaped China's political and social landscape. It even impacted China's relationship with the West.
So even events happening thousands of miles away had ripple effects across the globe. It seems like globalization was already starting to take shape back then, even without the internet or airplanes.
Exactly. It highlights how interconnected the world was becoming, even in the 19th century.
Okay, let's bring it back to the streets of New York. It seems like not all the drama was on the international stage or in the political arena. There's an article here about, well, a runaway cow.
Yes. This one is a bit of a lighter story, but it certainly paints a picture of daily life in the city. Imagine a cow on the loose, causing chaos in the streets.
I can't even imagine. Did they ever catch it?
That part, I'm afraid, remains a mystery. The article doesn't say. But it's a fun reminder that even amidst major historical events, sometimes it's the quirky, everyday happenings that stick with us.
Absolutely. Okay, speaking of things that stick with us, let's talk about those ads again. They're like little time capsules of consumer culture. Was there anything else that caught your eye?
There's one promoting a new type of stove. It claimed to be way more efficient and less smoky than traditional models.
Sounds like a welcome innovation, especially for those living in crowded tenements. Even back then, people were looking for ways to make their lives a little easier.
Absolutely. And the innovation wasn't limited to household items. Remember that cure truss we talked about? There are more ads for those, claiming to cure everything under the sun.
I guess some things never change. People are always looking for quick fixes, even if the claims are a little dubious.
Well, it's interesting to see how they marketed these products. The language is so over the top and persuasive. Even for something as simple as a stove, it makes you appreciate the art of advertising.
You're right. It makes me wonder if some of those 19th century ad techniques would still work today. Maybe with a few modern twists, of course.
Now, that's a fascinating thought. But while ad techniques might evolve, some things, unfortunately, remain all too constant. We're talking about crime.
Oh, right. There was an article about a man on trial for stealing a gold watch. What were the details on that?
Well, it seems the man claimed he was driven to steal out of desperation. He said he lost his job and was struggling to feed his family.
It's a sad reminder that economic hardship can lead people to do desperate things. Even in a bustling city like New York, poverty was a reality for many.
Absolutely. And this case highlights how crime is often a symptom of bigger social problems.
You're right. Punishing individuals doesn't always address the root causes of these issues.
Exactly. And speaking of crimes, there's another article here that's particularly disturbing. It details a brutal attack on a young boy who was simply playing in a park.
Oh no, that's awful. Was anyone caught?
The article says they did apprehend the attacker, but there's no explanation for his motives. It's a sobering reminder that even in a seemingly simpler time, darkness and violence could erupt anywhere.
It's a heavy thought. But let's not dwell on the negative for too long. I'm curious to hear more about the art and culture scene in 1854. What were New Yorkers doing for entertainment?
Well, there's an article here announcing a new art exhibition featuring works by prominent American painters. It sounds like New York's art scene was really starting to take off.
What kind of art was popular back then?
The article mentions landscapes, portraits, and still lifes. It seems like they were embracing a wide range of styles. It was also a time of great artistic innovation, with new techniques and movements emerging that would influence artists for generations to come.
It's amazing to think that even amidst political and social upheaval, art can still flourish and inspire.
Absolutely. And speaking of inspiration, there's another article about a concert featuring the renowned pianist Louis Moreau Gottschalk. He was known for his amazing skill and his ability to blend European classical music with American folk melodies.
I bet that was an incredible performance. It sounds like New Yorkers were embracing a fusion of musical styles.
They were. Gottschalk's concerts were wildly popular, drawing crowds from all walks of life.
It's wonderful to see how music can bring people together, even across social and cultural divides. Okay, so we've got art, music. What about religion? What role did faith play in the lives of New Yorkers back then?
Well, there's an article about the dedication of a new synagogue, which speaks to the growing Jewish community in the city. Remember, this was a time of huge immigration from Europe, and many of those coming to America were seeking religious freedom.
It's amazing to see how diverse New York City was becoming even back then.
It was. And the synagogue itself was apparently quite grand and ornate, reflecting the community's growing prosperity and their desire to create a beautiful place of worship.
It sounds like a symbol of both faith and resilience.
It does, doesn't it? And speaking of faith, there's also an article summarizing a sermon delivered by a prominent minister. His message focused on the challenges of living a moral life in such a rapidly changing world.
I can only imagine how relevant that message must have felt to those grappling with all the changes happening around them. It's a timeless theme, isn't it? Trying to stay grounded in your values when everything else feels uncertain.
It definitely is. And it speaks to the enduring power of faith to provide guidance and comfort in times of upheaval.
Okay, from matters of faith, let's shift to matters of governance. We know New York was changing rapidly back then. Were there any big debates happening about the role of government in society?
You bet. You've highlighted an article discussing a proposed law to regulate the sale of alcohol. It sounds like it sparked quite a debate.
What were the main arguments on each side?
Well, some saw it as an infringement on personal freedom, while others supported it as a way to curb drunkenness and its associated social ills.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's a debate that we still have today, striking that balance between individual liberties and the well-being of society.
Exactly. And here's another example of that tension. There's an article about a group advocating for improved sanitation in the city.
Makes sense. I imagine sanitation was a huge challenge in a rapidly growing city like New York.
It was. This group was pushing for better garbage collection, street cleaning, you name it. They were particularly concerned about preventing the spread of disease. Remember, this was long before modern sanitation systems, so outbreaks of cholera and other illnesses were a real threat.
It's easy to take basic sanitation for granted, but it's crucial for public health. It's also a reminder that even back then, people were recognizing the connection between government action and the well-being of its citizens.
You're absolutely right. And that concern for public health wasn't limited to sanitation. There's an article about the opening of a new hospital specifically dedicated to caring for the poor and those who couldn't afford medical care.
It's heartening to see that compassion and social responsibility were still driving forces, even as the city grappled with issues like poverty and inequality.
Definitely. And that sense of community extended beyond healthcare. There's another article highlighting the work of a charitable organization providing food, clothing, and shelter to those in need.
It's a reminder that even without a robust social safety net, people found ways to help each other. Private philanthropy played a vital role.
It did. And speaking of investing in the future, there's also an article about the opening of a brand new public school.
Education, always a hot topic. What was the focus of this new school?
The article emphasizes the commitment to providing equal opportunities for all children, regardless of their background or social class. It mentions modern facilities and experienced teachers, signaling a real investment in the future.
It's amazing to see how much emphasis they placed on education, even back then. They clearly recognized its importance for individual growth and societal progress.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about formal education either. There's an article about the establishment of a new library offering access to books and resources for adults as well.
So lifelong learning was already a thing in 1854. It makes you wonder what those New Yorkers would think of our vast digital libraries and online resources today.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? But even without the internet, it's clear they had a thirst for knowledge.
Speaking of knowledge, what about the world of science and discovery? Was there anything groundbreaking happening in 1854?
You've highlighted an article about a recent scientific expedition to the Arctic. It sounds like quite an adventure.
What were they hoping to achieve?
The article talks about their mission to gather data and learn more about the Arctic environment. Apparently, they faced brutal conditions, harsh weather, dangerous ice formations, but they persevered and brought back valuable information.
It's amazing to think about the risks they took to expand our understanding of the world. That spirit of exploration and discovery is truly inspiring.
It is, and that scientific curiosity wasn't just limited to far-off expeditions. There's an article here about a lecture given by a prominent astronomer. He was sharing the latest discoveries about the universe.
I bet that was a mind-blowing experience for the audience. Imagine hearing about those celestial wonders for the first time.
It must have been captivating. It reminds us that even back then, people were fascinated by the mysteries of the universe and eager to learn about our place in the cosmos.
Absolutely. And all that scientific knowledge, it wasn't just for stargazing. There's another article here about a brand new invention that promised to revolutionize communication.
Intriguing. What was it?
The article doesn't get into specifics, but it hints at a technology that could connect people over vast distances. It makes you wonder if they could have even imagined our modern world of instant communication.
It does, doesn't it? But even without smartphones and the internet, they were clearly driven by that same human desire to connect with each other and share ideas.
Speaking of sharing ideas, let's talk about the power of the written word. Were there any notable literary works or trends emerging in 1854?
You've highlighted an article about the publication of a new novel. It sounds like a captivating story, set in a distant land, exploring themes of love, loss, and the search for meaning.
It's a reminder that some things never change. People have always been drawn to stories that transport us, make us think, and connect us with the human experience.
Exactly. And storytelling wasn't just happening in novels. There's also an article about a letter to the editor published in the Times. It seems a concerned citizen wanted to voice his opinion on a pressing political issue.
Ah, the good old letter to the editor. Even back then, people were using the power of the press to engage in public discourse.
They were. It was a way for everyday citizens to share their views and participate in shaping public opinion.
It's interesting to see how that desire to engage in civic life was already taking root. Were there other ways people were getting involved?
There's an article about a public meeting where citizens gathered to discuss a proposed law. Sounds like a lively debate.
It highlights the importance of participatory democracy and the idea that ordinary people have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives.
Exactly. It's also a reminder that governing a rapidly growing and diverse city like New York was no easy feat.
Speaking of tough decisions, there's an article here about a debate among city officials on how to allocate resources. What were they grappling with?
The article mentions the challenge of balancing the needs of a growing population with limited funds. They were debating how to prioritize infrastructure projects, social services, and all those essential things a city needs to function.
It sounds like the age-old struggle of trying to do a lot with a little. Makes you appreciate the complexities of governance no matter the era.
It does. But while governance is about big-picture decisions, there's also the personal side of things. What about the realm of business and commerce? Were there any noteworthy happenings in that world?
Well, there's an article discussing a recent business deal that raised some eyebrows. It seems some people were questioning the ethics involved.
What was going on?
The article doesn't give specifics, but it hints at shady practices that benefited a select few at the expense of many.
It sounds like a classic case of greed and exploitation. It's a reminder that even as societies try to create fair systems, there will always be those who try to game the system for their own gain.
It also highlights the need for regulations and ethical guidelines to keep things in check.
Exactly. And unfortunately, ethical lapses weren't limited to the business world. There's another article here about a case of public corruption. It seems a government official was accused of using his position for personal profit.
Wow, so corruption scandals are nothing new. It seems like human nature with its flaws and temptations remains pretty consistent across the centuries.
It does, doesn't it? But alongside those darker aspects, there are also those uplifting stories of individuals striving for a better life. There's an article here about a young man who overcame incredible obstacles to achieve his dreams.
Tell me more. What were his dreams?
The article doesn't go into detail, but it emphasizes his determination and perseverance in the face of adversity. It's an inspiring reminder that even in difficult times, people can achieve amazing things.
It's a message that resonates no matter the era. It makes you wonder what those individuals from the past would think of our world today, with all its opportunities and challenges.
It does, doesn't it? But before we jump too far ahead, there's one more aspect of 1854 life I'd like to explore. It seems New Yorkers were also paying attention to their well-being, beyond just physical health.
What do you mean?
Well, there's an article here about the importance of leisure and recreation. It talks about the popularity of parks, theaters, and other forms of entertainment.
Even back then, people understood the need for downtime and the value of pursuing activities that brought them joy.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even as we strive for success and fulfillment, it's essential to make time for things that nourish our souls and bring us happiness.
So true. Okay, speaking of things that bring us joy, what about the world of fashion and design? Were there any trends taking New York by storm in 1854?
You bet. You've highlighted an article discussing the latest fashion trends. It seems certain fabrics, colors, and styles were all the rage.
It's fun to imagine those stylish New Yorkers strutting their stuff. I wonder what they would think of our modern fashion choices.
I'd love to know. But even back then, it's clear that fashion was more than just practicality. It was about self-expression, creativity, and projecting an image to the world.
And that attention to appearance wasn't limited to clothing, right?
Right. There's another article discussing the latest trends in hairstyles, suggesting that both men and women were very conscious of their grooming and presentation.
It's interesting to see how those seemingly superficial details can actually reveal a lot about a society's values and social norms.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of social norms, let's delve into a topic that's always at the heart of human society, love, relationships, and family life.
What kind of stories about love and family did you uncover in the Times?
Well, there's a lovely article announcing an upcoming wedding. It sounds like it was going to be a grand affair with lots of guests and elaborate festivities.
Even back then, weddings were a big deal. It's interesting to see how some traditions endure even as societies evolve.
You're right. And it speaks to that timeless human desire for love, companionship, and the creation of family.
Absolutely. But with family comes responsibility. Were there any articles addressing the challenges of raising children in 1854?
There is. One article focuses on the importance of parenting and the unique challenges of raising children in such a rapidly changing world.
I bet those challenges felt very real to parents back then, trying to instill values, prepare their children for the future, all while balancing their own lives and responsibilities.
Absolutely. It sounds like they were grappling with issues that are still relevant for parents today.
It's comforting to know that some things, even parenting struggles, transcend time.
It is. And speaking of things that transcend time, there's another article here that really struck me. It's about a local organization dedicated to helping those in need. They provided financial aid, food assistance, childcare support, all sorts of essential services.
That's incredible. It sounds like they were a real lifeline for struggling families and individuals.
They were. And it highlights that even in a rapidly growing and often chaotic city like New York, there was a strong sense of community and a belief in helping those less fortunate.
It's a powerful reminder that we're all in this together, no matter the era.
I agree. Now, speaking of being in it together, let's talk about education. We know they were opening new schools, but what were they teaching the next generation of New Yorkers?
Good question. Was there anything specific mentioned in the Times?
There's an article here that mentions the importance of teaching children about their civic duties and responsibilities.
That's fascinating. It sounds like they were already instilling the values of citizenship and civic engagement in their youth.
They were. It speaks to their belief in the importance of an informed and engaged citizenry for the health of a democracy.
It makes you wonder what those students went on to achieve and how they contributed to the future of New York City and beyond.
It does, doesn't it? It's a reminder that even the seemingly mundane details of daily life, the lessons taught in schools, the debates in newspapers, they all contribute to the larger story of a society.
Okay, before we get too philosophical, let's dive back into those fascinating glimpses of everyday life. What else stood out to you about how New Yorkers were spending their time?
There's an article here about the growing popularity of outdoor activities. It seems like parks and gardens were becoming important spaces for recreation and relaxation.
I can imagine those green spaces offered a much-needed escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. Even back then, people understood the restorative power of nature.
Exactly. And speaking of restoration, there's another article discussing the importance of sleep and rest.
Wait, really? They were talking about sleep back in 1854.
They were. It seems a prominent doctor was advocating for the benefits of a good night's sleep for both physical and mental well-being.
It's amazing to think that even without all the modern research we have today, they recognize the importance of sleep for a healthy life.
It is. It's a reminder that some basic principles of well-being hold true across the ages.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about fashion, but what about food? What were New Yorkers eating back in 1854?
You've got an article here about the opening of a new market offering a wide variety of fresh produce and other foodstuffs.
It's fun to imagine what those market stalls were like, overflowing with seasonal fruits and vegetables, freshly baked bread, and all sorts of local delicacies.
It does paint a vivid picture, doesn't it? And there's another article discussing the popularity of certain dishes, particularly those incorporating seasonal ingredients.
So even back then, people were embracing farm-to-table cuisine. It's interesting to see how certain culinary trends seem to come full circle.
It is. Now, speaking of trends, let's talk about something that's always evolving: language.
Oh, interesting. Did you find any articles about new words or slang emerging in 1854?
There's an article discussing the evolution of language and the way new words and phrases were entering common usage.
I wonder what those new words were and if any of them are still around today.
It would be fascinating to trace their origins, wouldn't it? It's a reminder that language is constantly evolving and adapting to reflect the changing world around us.
It is. Okay, let's talk about travel. How were people getting around in 1854? Were there any new forms of transportation emerging?
Well, you've got an article here about the expansion of the city's railway system. It seems like the railroads were becoming a major force in connecting different parts of the city and beyond.
I bet that was a game changer for both commerce and personal travel.
It was. The article highlights how the railroads were opening up new opportunities for trade and making it easier for people to visit distant relatives and explore new places.
It makes you wonder what those 19th century travelers would think of our modern transportation systems. Would they be amazed by the speed and convenience, or overwhelmed by the sheer scale and complexity?
It's a great question. But even with all our technological advancements, that fundamental human desire to explore and connect with different parts of the world, that remains constant.
So true. Okay, before we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, there's one more topic I'd like to touch on. It's something we've hinted at throughout our exploration, but I think it deserves its own spotlight. We're talking about the concept of progress.
Progress. Such a loaded word. What specifically about progress caught your eye in these 1854 articles?
Well, it seems like there was a real sense of optimism and belief in the power of human ingenuity to solve problems and create a better future. Whether it was through technological advancements, social reforms, or artistic expressions, there was a feeling that things were moving forward.
I see what you mean. It's easy to get bogged down in the challenges and conflicts of any era, but there's also that human drive to improve, to innovate, to strive for something better.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder, looking back from our vantage point, how would we define progress in the context of 1854? What advancements or changes would we point to as signs of a society moving in a positive direction?
It's a complex question. Progress can be measured in so many ways: technological, social, economic, even artistic. And what might have been seen as progress back then might be viewed differently through our modern lens.
You're right. It's a reminder that history is not just about the past, but about how we interpret and learn from it. And with that thought-provoking observation, I think it's time to move on to part 3 of our deep dive. I'm excited to see what other hidden gems we uncover in those 1854 New York Times pages.
Me too. It seems like we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating era.
We've covered so much ground already, from runaway cows to political intrigue. But before we wrap up our journey through 1854 New York, I want to revisit that ever-present backdrop, the Crimean War. We've discussed its impact on diplomacy and the economy.
Yeah.
But what about how New Yorkers were personally experiencing the war?
You've highlighted an article about a local fundraising effort for the families of soldiers fighting in Crimea. They were organizing a benefit concert, with all proceeds going to support the wives and children of those sent overseas.
It's amazing to see that kind of community support, even for a war happening so far away. It shows that empathy and a sense of shared humanity can transcend geographical boundaries.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just financial support either. There's another article about a group of women sewing blankets and warm clothing for the soldiers on the front lines.
That's so heartwarming. It's a reminder that even in times of conflict, people find ways to show their compassion and make a difference however they can.
These acts of kindness offer a powerful counterpoint to the harsh realities of war. They show the resilience of the human spirit and the strength of community in the face of adversity.
Speaking of resilience, there's one final theme I want to touch on before we sign off. Throughout these articles, I sensed a real feeling of wonder and possibility. It seems like New Yorkers in 1854 were living in a time of rapid change and exciting new discoveries. You've pointed to an article about a groundbreaking new invention,
Right.
a steam-powered carriage that promised to revolutionize transportation.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the excitement surrounding that? It's like the early days of the automobile when the possibilities seemed endless.
It was a time of immense technological advancement, and people were understandably enthusiastic about the potential of these inventions to change their lives for the better.
It makes you wonder what those 19th century New Yorkers would make of our modern world with our cars, airplanes, and smartphones.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? Would they be awestruck by our progress, or maybe caution us about the potential downsides of such rapid technological change?
That's a great point. It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line, and every advancement comes with its own set of challenges. But overall, I think we can agree that these glimpses into 1854 New York have painted a picture of a vibrant, dynamic city on the cusp of transformation.
Absolutely. We've seen the struggles and triumphs, the anxieties and aspirations of a people navigating a world on the brink of immense change. And while the details of their lives may seem distant, their stories resonate with our own human experience.
They certainly do. So, as we wrap up our deep dive, let's take a moment to appreciate those New Yorkers from over 170 years ago. Their lives captured in these newspaper snippets remind us that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about the people who lived through them, their hopes, their dreams, their challenges.
And it's through those individual stories that we can connect with the past, understand our present, and even imagine our future.
Beautifully said. So, until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep uncovering those fascinating stories that lie hidden within the pages of history.